The night my husband retired, I wore the blue dress he always said made my eyes look like the Tennessee sky in October. I sat at the head table, smiled at every speech, laughed at every joke, and raised my glass 4 separate times in his honor. I was the perfect wife, just as I had been for 32 years. And when he finally stood up at the podium and looked out over the 200 people who had come to celebrate him, he said the words I had been waiting 3 months to hear. "None of this would have been possible," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "without my partner, my anchor, the person who has been by my side through every storm." He paused. The room went quiet. 200 people turned to look at me. I smiled and touched my pearls. He was not looking at me, but I already knew that. That was the whole point. I should go back to the beginning, the real beginning, not the polished version I had been telling people for 3 decades. The version where Robert and I met at a church picnic in Knoxville in 1991, where he spilled lemonade on my white blouse and apologized so profusely for 10 minutes that I finally agreed to dinner just to make him stop. That version is true. Everything that came after it is also true, even the parts that hurt to say out loud. We built a good life, not a flashy life, not the kind people write about in magazines, but the kind that feels solid underfoot on a Tuesday morning when you're making coffee and your husband is reading the paper and the dog is sleeping in a patch of sunlight by the back door. We raised 2 children in a house in Franklin, Tennessee, a 4-bedroom colonial with a porch swing we actually used. I taught 4th grade for 26 years. My husband spent his career at a regional engineering firm, working his way from junior associate to managing partner. He was good at what he did. He was methodical, patient, precise. He noticed details other people missed. I thought I knew him completely. The notification appeared on a Thursday in February. I remember because it was the day after Valentine's Day, and I was sitting at the kitchen table going through receipts for our taxes. We shared a tablet for things like streaming and recipes, and it was lying on the table next to my folder of bank statements. I wasn't looking at it. I wasn't snooping. I was trying to find a receipt for a charitable donation we had made in November. The tablet lit up. I glanced over. It was a habit, the same way you glance at a ringing phone even when you're not going to answer it. The notification was from an app I didn't recognize. The preview text read, "Miss you already." Last night was exactly what I needed. I sat there for a long time. The coffee in my mug went cold. The dog came and put her head in my lap, and I scratched her ears without knowing I was doing it. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself there were 100 explanations. I told myself I was a 61-year-old woman with grandchildren on the way, and I was not going to be the kind of person who let one ambiguous notification unravel 32 years. Then I picked up the tablet. The app was password protected. I tried his birthday. Wrong. I tried our anniversary. Wrong. I tried the kids' birthdays. Wrong. I almost put it down. Then I tried the date of his first day at the firm, a date he had mentioned at least a dozen times over the years, because he always said it was the second best day of his life, the first being the day we got married. The app opened. I will not describe everything I read. Some things, once you know them, live inside you permanently, and there is no use giving them more real estate than they already occupy. What I will say is this. Her name was Linda. She was his business partner of 11 years. She had been in our home for dinner at least 30 times. She had come to our daughter's graduation party. She had sent me a fruit basket when I had knee surgery 2 years ago. I sat with that information for a very long time. Then I closed the app, put the tablet back exactly where it had been, and finished sorting my receipts. I did not cry that night. I did not confront him. I lay beside him in the bed we had shared for 30 years, and I listened to him breathe, and I thought, very clearly and very calmly, about what I was going to do. The answer came to me around 3 in the morning. I was going to wait. His retirement party was already scheduled. It had been planned for months. 200 guests, the banquet hall at the Hermitage Hotel in Nashville, a catered dinner, a program, speeches. The firm was honoring him with a plaque and a toast and a video montage of his career. It had been Linda's idea, actually. She had told me so herself, at Christmas, with her hand on my arm and her eyes full of something I now understood was not warmth. I had 4 months. I spent those months learning things I had never wanted to know, not in a reckless way, not in a way that would tip him off. I was a 4th-grade teacher for 26 years. I know how to be patient. I know how to observe without being observed. I know how to wait until the right moment to ask the question you already know the answer to. I also spent those months making phone calls to my attorney, to my financial advisor, to my sister in Chattanooga, who is the only person in my life who can keep a secret. She drove up on a Saturday in March, and we sat on the porch with sweet tea, and I told her everything, and she held my hand and did not say, "I told you so," even though she had always been slightly suspicious of my husband in a way I had never understood until now. I also did one other thing, one small, specific thing that required a single phone call and a favor from a woman I had taught alongside for 15 years before she retired and became the event coordinator at the Hermitage Hotel. I asked her to change the seating arrangement at table 11. Let me explain table 11. The retirement party had a seating chart. Robert had approved it himself because he was meticulous about these things. He and I were at the head table. Our children and their families were at table 1. Longtime friends and colleagues were distributed throughout the room. Linda and her husband Gary were originally seated at table 6, near the center of the room, with other partners from the firm. I asked my friend to move them to table 11. Against the far wall, near the service door, as far from the podium as you could get while still technically being in the same room. She asked me why. I told her I'd explain later. The months passed. I behaved exactly as I always had. I cooked dinner. I asked about his day. I sat beside him at his nephew's wedding in April and toasted to love and commitment with a smile so steady that my sister, who was watching from across the room, told me afterward it scared her a little. I was not performing happiness. I was storing energy, the way a battery stores charge, and I knew exactly when I was going to spend it. The week before the party, my husband came home from work and told me that the evening was going to be perfect. He said it while he was hanging up his coat, not looking at me. "It's going to be a night nobody forgets," he said. "I know," I said. "I've been looking forward to it for months." He turned and smiled at me. He had a good smile. He had always had a good smile. I had fallen in love with that smile at a church picnic 33 years ago, and some part of me still recognized what it had once meant. That part was quiet now, but it was not gone. It had simply made room for something else. On the night of the party, I got dressed carefully. The blue dress, the pearl earrings he had given me for our 25th anniversary. My hair was done. I had spent the afternoon at the salon, and the woman who does my hair told me I looked like I was going to a celebration. I told her I was. We arrived at the Hermitage at 6:30. The room was beautiful. I will give them that. Round tables with white linens and candles. The firm's logo on a banner near the entrance. A photo display of Robert's career along one wall. People greeted us at the door. I shook hands and accepted compliments and said all the right things. I watched Linda and Gary arrive at 6:45. Linda was wearing a red dress, which struck me as bold. She hugged me. I hugged her back. She smelled like the same perfume she always wore, something expensive and floral, and I thought about the messages I had read, the ones where my husband had said he loved that perfume, and I held the thought for exactly 1 second before I let it go. Gary shook Robert's hand. Gary was a quiet man, a high school football coach, the kind of person who shows up, does what is asked of him, and trusts the people in his life to do the same. I had always liked Gary. I liked him even more now. I leaned over to the event coordinator who was standing near the entry, and she gave me a small nod. Table 11 was ready. Dinner was served at 7. The speeches began at 8. 3 colleagues spoke first, the kind of speeches full of inside jokes and career anecdotes that make strangers smile politely. Then our son spoke beautifully about his father's work ethic and integrity, and I watched Robert's face while our son talked, and I felt something complicated and private move through me. Then it was Linda's turn. She walked to the podium in her red dress, and she spoke about my husband for 7 minutes. She talked about his vision, his patience, his ability to see solutions where other people saw only problems. She talked about what a privilege it had been to build something alongside him. Her voice was warm and her eyes were bright, and she never once looked at me. When she sat back down, the room applauded. I applauded too. Then my husband stood up. He was 64 years old, and he still stood like he was 35, and I thought, not for the first time, that this was the thing about a person you have loved for a long time. You know them in layers, the way you know a house you have lived in. Every creak of the floorboards, every draft in winter, every place where the paint has started to peel. You love the whole structure even after you discover the rot. He thanked the firm. He thanked his colleagues. He thanked our children. He thanked Gary, which I thought was a particularly interesting choice given the circumstances. He got a little sentimental about the business he and Linda had built together, and he used the phrase, "a partnership for the ages," and I watched Linda's face from across the room, and I watched Gary's face, and I thought about how one person in that sentence had no idea what it meant. Then he paused. He looked out at the room. He looked at me. "Most importantly," he said, "I want to thank the person who made all of this possible, the person who has been my anchor, my constant, my soft place to land for more than 3 decades, the person without whom none of this would mean anything." He raised his glass. "To the love of my life," he said. There was a beat. Half a second, maybe less. I stood up. Not dramatically. I did not push my chair back so hard it scraped the floor. I did not have a trembling voice or shaking hands. I stood up the way I had stood up in front of a classroom of 9-year-olds for 26 years calmly, with full authority, knowing exactly what I was about to say and exactly why. 200 people looked at me. "I'd like to add something," I said, clearly enough that the room went still. The microphone was still on at the podium, but I didn't need it. I had a teacher's voice. I had spent decades projecting to the back of a room. Robert stared at me. His glass was still raised. "This is a night for honesty," I said, "and I think we should be honest about what we're celebrating. So I'd like to propose a toast as well." I lifted my glass. To Robert's soft place to land, to his anchor, to his constant. I turned and looked directly at table 11. "Linda," I said, "I believe those are your words." The room did not make a sound. Linda went still. And I mean completely still, the way an animal goes still when it understands it has nowhere to run. "I also want to thank Gary," I said, "for joining us tonight. I thought it was important that he be here. I've always thought Gary deserved to know the people in his life." Gary looked at Linda. Then he looked at my husband. Then he looked back at Linda. I watched him put something together in real time, and I felt a grief for him that was separate from everything else I felt. Clean and simple and honest. I set my glass down. "Robert," I said, "your attorney will be receiving paperwork on Monday. I've already arranged to stay with my sister this week, so you'll have the house to yourself to make whatever arrangements you need to make." I picked up my small evening bag from my chair. "The dinner is paid for," I said to the room, because I was still, even then, a woman who took care of details. "Please enjoy it." I walked out of the banquet hall. My sister was waiting for me in the lobby. She had driven up from Chattanooga that afternoon and checked into the hotel and sat in the lobby for 2 hours reading a mystery novel, just in case I needed her. That was the kind of sister she was. She stood up when she saw me. She looked at my face. "Well?" she said. "I need a glass of wine," I said. We went to the hotel bar and we sat in a corner booth, and I told her everything, and she held my hand across the table, and we stayed there until midnight. The two of us, talking the way sisters talk when the night has been long and they finally have time to say what they mean. I will not pretend the months that followed were easy. They were not. 32 years of a life together does not untangle neatly. There was paperwork and phone calls and one very difficult conversation with our son and a slightly less difficult one with our daughter, who had always been more perceptive than her brother and told me, quietly, that she had suspected something was wrong for over a year. There were days when I woke up at 5 in the morning to a silence that felt like a presence in the room, and I had to remind myself that silence was not the same as loneliness. I moved back into the house. My husband moved out. Gary filed for divorce 3 weeks after the party. He did not call me, and I did not call him. But I heard through mutual acquaintances that he handled it the way he handled most things, quietly, with his head down, moving forward. Linda and my husband did not last the year. I know because our son told me, carefully, the way he delivered all difficult information, as if he were setting something fragile on a table. I did not feel what I expected to feel when I heard it. I felt very little, actually. By then I had other things to pay attention to. In September, I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center in Franklin. I had always wanted to learn. I had told myself for years that I didn't have time, that I was too tired, that I would do it eventually. I signed up on a Tuesday afternoon and I drove myself there on the following Thursday, and I sat down at a table with 7 other people and I picked up a brush for the first time in my life and I made something. It wasn't good. It was a clumsy attempt at a magnolia blossom that looked more like a crumpled napkin. My instructor, a retired art teacher named Suzanne, looked at it and said, "You're holding the brush too tight. Loosen your grip. Let the paint do some of the work." I thought about that for a long time afterward. In November, my sister and I drove to Charleston for a long weekend. We ate seafood and walked along the water and stayed up late on the hotel balcony, talking about nothing in particular, the same way we had talked as teenagers sharing a bedroom in our parents' house in Knoxville. I took photographs of the harbor in the morning light. I thought about how long it had been since I had gone somewhere without asking permission, without checking whether it was convenient, without building my movements around someone else's schedule. It had been a very long time. By December, my watercolor magnolia had improved considerably. Suzanne told me I had a natural feel for color, which I thought was one of the kindest things anyone had said to me in a while. I started going twice a week instead of once. I began to understand what she meant about the grip, about loosening the hold on something and trusting what happens when you do. My granddaughter was born in January, my son's first child, a girl they named Claire. I was in the waiting room when she arrived, and when my son came out and put her in my arms for the first time, this 8-pound, red-faced, astonishing person who had not yet learned that the world was complicated, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. I felt located, like a compass needle finally pointing true north. I do not regret the night of the retirement party. I have thought about it from many angles, and I have looked for the regret, and I cannot find it. Some people have said to me gently, with the best intentions, that it might have been more dignified to handle it privately. Those people are not wrong, exactly. There is a version of this story where I say nothing in that room and take my grief home quietly and process it in private, and that version is also valid, and I do not judge it. But I had been quiet for 32 years. I had been the anchor, the constant, the soft place to land. I had taught other people's children to read, raised 2 human beings into adults I am genuinely proud of, kept a household running with the kind of invisible competence that nobody thinks to call competence because it has always simply been there. I had folded my ambitions into smaller and smaller shapes to fit the space available. I was 61 years old, standing in a beautiful room full of people, and for the first time in a very long time, I said exactly what I meant. That felt like dignity to me. There is a painting on my kitchen wall now. I did it myself, in watercolor, in Suzanne's class on a Thursday afternoon in March. It is not technically perfect. The proportions are slightly off, and there is a place in the upper left corner where the blue bled into the white in a way I did not intend. But Suzanne looked at it and said, "Sometimes the mistakes become the best part." It is a painting of the Tennessee sky in October. The blue that my husband once said matched my eyes. I kept the dress too. I still wear it. Not because of what it meant to him, but because of what it means now, that the woman who put it on that night was not broken, was not defeated, was not defined by what was done to her. She walked into a room, and she told the truth, and she walked back out again. She was 61 years old. She had a lot of life left. I want you to remember that. If you're sitting somewhere right now with a weight on your chest that you've been carrying so long, you've forgotten what it felt like not to have it. I want you to remember that the years behind you do not determine the years ahead. I want you to remember that starting over at 60 is not a tragedy. It is, sometimes, the first honest beginning you've ever had. I'm not angry anymore. I was, for a while, and I allowed myself that because it was true and because I had earned it. But anger is a fuel that burns hot and fast and leaves you standing in the cold when it's gone. What I have now is quieter and more durable. It is the feeling of sitting on my porch in the evening with a glass of iced tea, watching the light change over the yard, knowing that every decision I make from here belongs entirely to me. My sister called last week and asked if I wanted to drive up to the Smoky Mountains in April. A long weekend, hiking and cabins and no particular schedule. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Claire has her grandmother's eyes, my son tells me, the same shade of blue. I told him I thought that was a very fine thing to be. Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight because if I've learned anything this past year, it's that women like us are everywhere and we are stronger than anyone gave us credit for. Like this video if it touched something in you, and if you know someone who needs to hear this story tonight, please share it with them. I'll be back next week. Take care of yourselves until then.